Of forbidden passion, 34-year-old Marcus woke up screaming in agony. By sunrise, his body was shutting down, burning from the inside out. The doctors rushed him into emergency surgery, but what they found defied all medical explanation. His organs were failing, his blood was toxic, and strange chemical burns were spreading across his skin like wildfire. Was it a rare disease, a deadly poison, or something far more calculated and cruel? The 68-year-old woman he had spent the night with, Eleanor, sat quietly in the hospital waiting room, tears streaming down her face. But were those tears of genuine concern, or were they the performance of a lifetime? The truth behind this case will shatter everything you think you know about desire, trust, and the lengths people will go to for love. Before we continue with this shocking story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Who was Marcus Thompson, this charismatic but reckless soul who seemed drawn to danger like a moth to flame? What really happened during those intimate hours in Eleanor's modest Jacksonville home? And how did a secret affair between two lonely people transform into one of the most baffling medical mysteries that detectives had ever encountered? Tonight, we're taking you inside a case that left an entire community questioning whether they ever really knew their neighbors at all. Was Eleanor Mitchell the grieving widow she appeared to be, or was she hiding secrets that could destroy lives? As Marcus lay fighting for his life in that sterile hospital room, investigators were already asking the hard questions, but nothing could have prepared them for what they would uncover in the coming weeks. This is the story of how passion became poison, how trust became betrayal, and how a single night changed two lives forever. Marcus Thompson was the kind of man who lived life on his own terms. Consequences be damned. At 34, he had already burned through 2 marriages, 3 jobs, and countless relationships that friends described as complicated at best. He was a contractor by trade, working odd jobs around Jacksonville, but his real passion seemed to be chasing thrills that most people his age had outgrown. His weathered hands told the story of hard work, but his restless eyes revealed a man who was always searching for something more, something different, something that would make him feel alive again. Friends would later tell investigators that Marcus had a particular attraction to older women, claiming they understood him better than women his own age. He frequented the quiet bars on the outskirts of town, the kind of places where conversations happened in whispers and everyone minded their own business. Eleanor Mitchell presented a stark contrast to Marcus in almost every way imaginable. At 68 years old, she was the picture of respectability in her quiet neighborhood. Her late husband Robert had passed away 3 years earlier after a long battle with cancer, leaving Eleanor alone in the house they had shared for 42 years. Neighbors described her as polite but distant, the kind of woman who tended her garden meticulously and always had fresh cookies for the mailman during the holidays. She was small in stature, barely 5 feet tall, with silver hair she kept in a neat bun, and clothes that spoke of another era. But behind her gentle exterior, Eleanor was carrying a weight of loneliness that few people could understand. The long nights in that empty house had become unbearable, and the silence seemed to echo with memories of happier times when Robert's laughter filled every room. What drew these two vastly different souls together would become a central question in the investigation that followed. Marcus, with his rough edges and dangerous charm, seemed like the last person who would catch the attention of a grieving widow. Eleanor, with her quiet dignity and careful manners, appeared to be the antithesis of the kind of woman Marcus usually pursued. But loneliness has a way of breaking down barriers that logic tries to maintain. 2 hearts seeking connection, 2 people tired of being alone, 2 lives that were about to collide in a way that would leave one of them fighting for survival and the other facing questions that would haunt her for the rest of her days. It was a humid Thursday evening in July when Marcus pushed through the heavy wooden door of O'Malley's Pub, a dimly lit establishment that had seen better decades. The air conditioning was struggling against the Florida heat, and the familiar smell of stale beer and fried food hung heavy in the air. Marcus took his usual seat at the far end of the bar, ordering a whiskey neat and scanning the room with practiced eyes. That's when he noticed her sitting alone in a corner booth, nursing a glass of white wine and staring out the window with a distant expression that spoke of deep thought or profound sadness. Eleanor had never been inside O'Malley's before that night. She had driven past it countless times over the years, always wondering what kind of people spent their evenings in such places. But on this particular evening, after spending another day cleaning Robert's belongings and preparing them for donation, the silence of her house had become too much to bear. She needed to be around people, even strangers, even in a place that felt foreign and slightly dangerous to her sensibilities. She had chosen the corner booth because it offered privacy while still allowing her to observe the other patrons, and she found herself fascinated by their casual interactions and easy laughter. Marcus approached her table with the confidence of a man who had done this dance many times before. He asked if he could join her, commenting on how she seemed too elegant for a place like O'Malley's. Eleanor was startled by the attention, but found herself nodding, gesturing to the empty seat across from her. What followed was a conversation that surprised them both with its depth and honesty. Marcus spoke about his failed marriages and his constant search for meaning in a life that often felt empty. Eleanor opened up about the crushing loneliness of widowhood and the way grief had become her constant companion. As the evening progressed and the alcohol loosened their inhibitions, their conversation became more intimate. Marcus found himself drawn to Eleanor's gentle wisdom and the way she listened without judgment. Eleanor was captivated by Marcus's passion for life and his refusal to accept the mundane. When the bar announced last call, neither wanted the connection to end. Eleanor made a decision that would change everything. She asked Marcus if he would like to continue their conversation at her house. The drive to Eleanor's modest two-bedroom home took less than 10 minutes, but it felt like crossing into another world. The house was immaculate, filled with antique furniture and family photographs that told the story of a life well lived. Eleanor poured them each another drink, and they settled onto her floral couch, their conversation growing more personal with each passing moment. What happened next would be dissected by investigators, medical professionals, and armchair detectives for months to come. The physical attraction that had been building throughout the evening finally reached its inevitable conclusion. Eleanor, who hadn't been intimate with anyone since Robert's death, found herself responding to Marcus's touch with a passion she thought had died with her husband. Marcus, despite the significant age difference, was genuinely attracted to Eleanor's vulnerability and strength. Their lovemaking was tender yet desperate, two lonely souls finding temporary solace in each other's arms. They fell asleep intertwined on Eleanor's bed, exhausted by emotion and alcohol, unaware that by morning everything would be different. If you're still with us, type "I'm still here" in the comments, so we know who's really following this story closely. Marcus woke up at approximately 6:30 in the morning and immediately knew something was terribly wrong. A burning sensation was spreading through his abdomen, and his skin felt like it was on fire. He stumbled to Eleanor's bathroom, where he vomited violently, the contents of his stomach tinged with blood. Eleanor found him collapsed on her bathroom floor, his body convulsing with pain and his skin taking on a grayish pallor that frightened her more than anything she had ever witnessed. The ambulance arrived within minutes of Eleanor's frantic 911 call, and paramedics immediately recognized the severity of Marcus's condition. His blood pressure was dangerously low, his heart rate was erratic, and he was showing signs of severe poisoning. During the chaotic rush to Jacksonville Memorial Hospital, Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling incoherently about burning and begging for the pain to stop. Eleanor followed the ambulance in her own car, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the steering wheel. At the hospital, Dr. Sarah Martinez quickly took charge of Marcus's case. A 20-year veteran of emergency medicine, Dr. Martinez had seen her share of unusual cases, but Marcus's symptoms presented a puzzle that had her and her team working frantically to identify the cause. Blood tests revealed toxic levels of an unknown substance, and his organs were showing signs of rapid deterioration. The medical team began aggressive treatment to flush the poison from his system, but without knowing exactly what they were dealing with, they were essentially fighting blind. As word of the mysterious illness spread through the hospital, speculation began immediately. Nurses whispered about the significant age difference between Marcus and Eleanor, and some couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the story than a simple romantic encounter gone wrong. Dr. Martinez, however, was focused solely on saving Marcus's life. She ordered every test she could think of, consulting with toxicology experts and poison control centers across the state. Eleanor spent those first critical hours pacing the hospital waiting room, alternating between silent prayer and quiet sobbing. Other visitors and staff members couldn't help but stare at the elderly woman who had arrived with the young man fighting for his life in the emergency room. Some offered sympathetic glances, while others exchanged knowing looks that made Eleanor feel exposed and judged. She called her daughter Patricia, who lived in Tampa, explaining the situation as best she could while trying to process it herself. By the second day, when Marcus's condition had stabilized but not improved, hospital administration made the decision to contact local law enforcement. The combination of the unusual circumstances and the severity of the poisoning raised red flags that couldn't be ignored. Detective James Rodriguez of the Jacksonville Police Department was assigned to the case, and his first interview was with Eleanor herself. She sat in the small hospital conference room, her hands folded in her lap, answering his questions with a quiet dignity that impressed the veteran investigator. Eleanor explained how she and Marcus had met at O'Malley's, their conversation over drinks, and her decision to invite him to her home. She described their intimate encounter with a combination of embarrassment and defiance, making it clear that while she understood how it might appear to others, their connection had been genuine and consensual. When Detective Rodriguez asked about anything unusual they might have consumed, Eleanor mentioned the wine they had shared and the leftover pasta she had heated up for a late dinner. Detective Rodriguez was struck by Eleanor's apparent sincerity, but his experience had taught him that appearances could be deceiving, especially in cases involving intimate relationships and suspicious illnesses. He arranged for a thorough search of Eleanor's home, looking for any substances that might have caused Marcus's condition. The search team consisted of forensics experts, a toxicologist, and 2 additional detectives who methodically examined every room, cabinet, and container in the house. The investigation took an interesting turn when detectives discovered Eleanor's extensive collection of herbal remedies and homeopathic treatments in her kitchen and bedroom. Jars filled with various powders, tinctures, and dried herbs lined the shelves of her pantry, and her bathroom medicine cabinet contained an array of alternative treatments that she had been using to cope with her grief and insomnia. Eleanor explained that she had always been interested in natural healing methods, and her collection had grown significantly since Robert's death as she searched for anything that might help her sleep peacefully. Media attention began to intensify as word of the unusual case spread through Jacksonville's tight-knit community. Local news stations picked up the story, initially reporting it as a mysterious illness, but gradually shifting their focus to the relationship between Marcus and Eleanor. Headlines like "Elderly Woman's Lover Mysteriously Poisoned" and "Age Gap Romance Ends in Medical Emergency" began appearing in newspapers and online forums. The coverage was sensationalized and often cruel, painting Eleanor as either a predatory older woman or a calculating killer, while Marcus was portrayed alternately as a victim or an opportunistic young man taking advantage of a lonely widow. The pressure of public scrutiny took a tremendous toll on Eleanor, who had never experienced anything like the invasive attention she was now receiving. Neighbors who had barely spoken to her in 3 years suddenly found themselves being interviewed by reporters, offering opinions about her character and speculating about her possible motives. Some defended her as a kind and gentle woman who was simply lonely, while others whispered about how she had always seemed different and secretive since her husband's death. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source, Dr. Patricia Wong, a toxicology expert at the University of Florida who had been consulted on Marcus's case. After running extensive tests on both Marcus's blood samples and the substances found in Eleanor's home, Dr. Wong made a discovery that would change everything. Hidden among Eleanor's collection of herbal remedies was a small, unlabeled glass vial containing a highly concentrated extract that tested positive for compounds found in the manchineal tree, one of the most toxic plants in the world. The manchineal tree, native to tropical regions of the Americas, contains toxins so potent that even standing under it during rainfall can cause severe chemical burns. Every part of the tree is poisonous, but the fruit and sap contain the highest concentrations of toxic compounds. What made Dr. Wong's discovery even more shocking was the purity and concentration of the extract found in Eleanor's possession. This was not something that could have been created accidentally or obtained easily. It required specific knowledge and deliberate preparation. When confronted with this evidence, Eleanor's composure finally cracked. Through tears and trembling hands, she confessed to Detective Rodriguez that she had indeed added the extract to the wine they had shared that evening, but she swore that she had never intended to hurt Marcus. Her explanation, while shocking, revealed a level of desperation and loneliness that was both heartbreaking and terrifying. Eleanor explained that she had obtained the manchineal extract years earlier from an online herbalist who had marketed it as a powerful treatment for depression and chronic pain. She had been using tiny amounts mixed with tea to help her sleep and cope with her grief, unaware of its true toxicity. On the night she met Marcus, Eleanor said she had added what she thought was a harmless amount to their wine, believing it would help them both relax and connect on a deeper level. She claimed she had read online that certain plant extracts could enhance intimacy and emotional bonding between partners. The medical evidence supported some aspects of Eleanor's story, while raising serious questions about others. The concentration of toxins in Marcus's blood was indeed consistent with someone who had consumed a small amount of the extract, but toxicology experts noted that even a small miscalculation could have been fatal. Dr. Wong explained that manchineal poisoning affects people differently based on their body weight, overall health, and tolerance to various compounds. Marcus's larger size and overall fitness had likely saved his life, but someone smaller or in poorer health might not have survived. Detective Rodriguez found himself facing a complex legal and moral puzzle. Eleanor's actions had clearly caused Marcus's near-fatal illness, but her apparent lack of intent to cause serious harm complicated the question of criminal charges. The district attorney's office spent weeks debating whether to charge Eleanor with attempted murder, reckless endangerment, or assault. Legal experts were divided on whether her claims of ignorance about the extract's toxicity would hold up in court. The case took another dramatic turn when investigators discovered Eleanor's online search history from the weeks leading up to her encounter with Marcus. Her internet browsing revealed an obsessive pattern of research into herbal remedies for loneliness, depression, and what she described in various forum posts as reconnecting with life after loss. More disturbing were searches for natural aphrodisiacs, herbal love potions, and plants that increase emotional bonding. The timeline of her searches suggested that Eleanor had been planning to use the extract for several weeks before meeting Marcus. Dr. Martinez, who had been treating Marcus throughout his ordeal, offered her perspective on Eleanor's motivations. She explained that grief can cause people to make desperate decisions that they would never consider under normal circumstances. The profound loneliness Eleanor had experienced after her husband's death, combined with her lack of understanding about the substances she was experimenting with, had created a perfect storm of poor judgment and dangerous consequences. As Marcus slowly recovered from his ordeal, spending nearly 3 weeks in the hospital before being discharged, the legal proceedings against Eleanor began in earnest. The district attorney ultimately decided to charge her with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, acknowledging that while her intent may not have been to cause serious harm, her actions had been reckless and dangerous enough to warrant serious consequences. The trial of Eleanor Mitchell became a media sensation that divided public opinion down the middle. Supporters saw her as a lonely, grieving widow who had made a terrible mistake while searching for human connection. Critics viewed her as a dangerous individual who had deliberately poisoned a much younger man for reasons that remained unclear. The courtroom was packed daily with spectators, reporters, and legal experts who debated every aspect of the case. Eleanor's defense attorney, Margaret Chen, built her case around the theme of grief-induced poor judgment and genuine ignorance about the toxicity of the substances Eleanor had been using. Chen brought in expert witnesses to testify about the psychological effects of prolonged grief and the desperate measures people sometimes take when trying to reconnect with life after losing a spouse. She argued that Eleanor's actions, while undeniably dangerous, were the result of profound loneliness and a sincere but misguided attempt to find companionship. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Michael Stevens, painted a different picture entirely. Stevens argued that Eleanor's extensive online research proved she knew the risks involved in using such substances, and her decision to secretly administer the extract to Marcus without his knowledge constituted a deliberate assault. He emphasized that regardless of Eleanor's stated intentions, her actions had nearly killed an innocent man who had trusted her enough to accept her invitation into her home. Marcus himself provided the most compelling testimony during the 3-week trial. Still weak from his ordeal but determined to see justice served, he described the excruciating pain he had experienced and the lasting health effects he continued to face. However, his testimony took an unexpected turn when he addressed Eleanor directly, acknowledging that he believed her when she said she hadn't meant to hurt him. He spoke about the genuine connection they had shared that evening and his belief that her actions were born from desperation rather than malice. Eleanor's own testimony was the emotional climax of the trial. Speaking in a voice barely above a whisper, she described the crushing loneliness she had felt since Robert's death and her increasingly desperate attempts to find ways to cope with her grief. She explained how she had turned to herbal remedies and alternative treatments when traditional medicine failed to help her sleep or find peace. Through tears, she expressed her profound regret for what had happened to Marcus and her horror at learning how dangerous the extract truly was. The jury deliberated for 2 full days before reaching their verdict. They found Eleanor guilty of aggravated assault, but recommended leniency in sentencing due to the unusual circumstances of the case. Judge Patricia Williams ultimately sentenced Eleanor to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. The sentence satisfied neither Eleanor's supporters, who felt it was too harsh, nor her critics, who believed she deserved a much longer prison term. The aftermath of the trial continued to reverberate through Jacksonville's community for months afterward. Eleanor served 14 months in prison before being granted parole, during which time she participated in counseling programs designed to help her process her grief in healthier ways. Upon her release, she moved to a small town in North Carolina to live near her daughter, leaving behind the house where she had spent 45 years of her life. Marcus underwent months of additional medical treatment to address the lasting effects of the poisoning. While he eventually recovered most of his physical health, the psychological trauma of the experience changed him profoundly. He became an advocate for awareness about the dangers of unregulated herbal supplements and frequently spoke about his experience at medical conferences and community events. So what do you think really happened that night in Eleanor's quiet Jacksonville home? Was this truly the desperate act of a grieving widow who simply didn't understand the deadly nature of what she was giving to a man she barely knew but felt connected to? Or was there something darker at work, a calculated plan to harm Marcus for reasons that may never be fully understood? The jury saw Eleanor as a woman whose judgment had been clouded by grief and loneliness, but many people who followed the case continue to believe there were aspects of her story that never quite added up. Consider the complexity of Eleanor's situation for a moment. She was a 68-year-old woman who had been married for over 4 decades, suddenly alone and struggling with a level of isolation that most of us can barely imagine. The herbal extracts and alternative remedies she had been experimenting with represented her attempts to find some relief from her emotional pain. But does desperation excuse the decision to secretly administer a potentially dangerous substance to another person? How do we balance compassion for someone suffering with accountability for actions that could have resulted in death? Marcus's recovery and his eventual forgiveness of Eleanor add another layer of complexity to this already complicated story. His willingness to acknowledge the genuine connection they had shared that evening, even after everything he had endured, speaks to a level of understanding and empathy that not everyone might be capable of. But should Marcus's forgiveness influence how we view Eleanor's actions? Does the victim's perspective carry more weight than the potential consequences of what could have happened? This case also raises broader questions about loneliness in our society, particularly among older adults who may be struggling with grief and isolation. Eleanor's story highlights how desperation can lead people to make dangerous decisions when they're searching for human connection. It also illustrates the risks associated with unregulated herbal supplements and alternative treatments that people often assume are safe simply because they're natural. What do you think should have happened to Eleanor? Was the sentence she received appropriate for her actions, or should the punishment have been more severe given the potential consequences of what she did? How would you feel if you were in Marcus's position, waking up in agony after what you thought was a consensual, intimate encounter, only to learn that you had been unknowingly poisoned by someone you had trusted? These are the questions that make this case so fascinating and disturbing at the same time. Let us know in the comments what you think about Eleanor's motivations and whether you believe her story about not intending to cause serious harm. Do you think grief and loneliness can excuse dangerous behavior, or should people be held fully accountable for their actions regardless of their emotional state? And if you found this story as gripping as we did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life cases that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about human nature. Trust, desire, and desperation can create a dangerous combination, and sometimes the line between victim and perpetrator isn't as clear as we'd like it to be.